Chapter 1. The Empty House. Thomas Reed sat on a chair near the window. His hands were weak, and his hair was white. On the small table beside him was a photo of his family, his wife Evelyn, and their 3 children. The picture was old, taken many years ago when everyone still lived in this house. Now the rooms were quiet. Only the sound of the clock could be heard. Thomas looked at the photo and smiled sadly. He missed the days when his children laughed and ran across the room. Evelyn came from the kitchen and looked at him. "Thomas, you haven't said anything since morning," she said softly. Thomas smiled. "I was thinking," he replied. "Thinking about what?" she asked. "About them," he said, pointing at the photo. Evelyn sat down beside him and sighed. "They don't come home anymore," she whispered. "Everyone is busy now." Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "but one day they might remember." That night Evelyn could not sleep. She turned on her bed and looked at the ceiling. The house was dark and silent. She remembered how it once sounded: footsteps, laughter, and voices. Now it was only quiet. She whispered, "Maybe they have forgotten how it feels to come home." A tear rolled down her cheek. Next morning, Thomas went for a walk, and Evelyn opened a drawer. Inside was an old box full of papers and drawings. She smiled when she saw them. Caleb, their eldest, had drawn a house and written home. Landon, the middle one, had drawn a small boat. Elena, the youngest, had written, "I love you, Mom." Evelyn touched the papers gently. Her eyes filled with tears, but her heart felt warm. Thomas came back and saw the box in her hands. "You are looking at those again," he said softly. Evelyn smiled faintly. "I miss them, Thomas. I want to see them together again." Thomas sat near her and said kindly, "Then call them." Evelyn looked unsure. "What if they don't come?" she asked. "Then at least you will know you tried," he said. Evelyn took the phone and dialed a number. It was Caleb's. The phone rang for a long time. Then a woman answered. "Hello, this is Nora." Evelyn smiled. "Oh dear, it's Mom. How are you both?" Nora said, "We're fine, Mom. Caleb is in a meeting. I'll tell him you called." Evelyn said gently, "Please tell him I'd like to talk." Nora replied, "I will, Mom." Then Evelyn called Landon. His voice sounded tired. "Hi, Mom," he said. "It's been long." Evelyn said softly, "You should visit sometime. It would make me happy." Landon was silent for a few seconds, then said, "I'll try, Mom." Finally, she called Elena. "Hi, Mom," Elena said quickly. "How are you?" Evelyn smiled. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I miss you." Elena was quiet for a moment, then said, "I miss you too, Mom. I'll come soon." When Evelyn ended the last call, she sat quietly for a while. Her eyes were full of hope. Thomas looked at her and said softly, "You did it, Evelyn." She smiled, a little tired but peaceful. "Yes," she said. "Now we wait." That evening they sat together near the window. The light was soft, and the wind moved outside. Evelyn looked at the empty road and whispered, I hope they still remember the way home. Thomas held her hand gently and said, They will. Love always remembers its home. Chapter 2. The Busy Sun. Caleb Reed sat at his office desk, staring at the screen. The numbers on the computer made no sense to him today. He had worked hard to reach this position. The job paid well, but his heart felt empty. He leaned back and rubbed his eyes. His phone buzzed, showing a missed call from Mom. He looked at it for a few seconds, then put the phone face down. He had seen her message too. Simple words, full of love. But he didn't know what to say. His wife Nora entered the room holding a cup of coffee. "You're still working?" she asked. He nodded. "I have to finish these reports." She placed the cup on his desk. "Your mother called today," she said quietly. Caleb looked up. "You spoke to her?" Nora nodded. "Yes. She just wanted to talk. She sounded lonely." Caleb sighed and looked away. "I know," he said. "She always sounds lonely." Nora sat on the edge of the table. "Maybe you should call her back," she said softly. "It's been months." Caleb said nothing. He opened his laptop again, pretending to work. Nora stood there for a moment, then walked out slowly. The house was silent again. Caleb stared at the photo on his wall. His family during a vacation years ago. He remembered his father teaching him to fix a broken fence, and his mother bringing them lemonade. They were simple moments, but now they felt far away. He thought, why do we wait until it's too late to care? Later that evening, he sat in the living room. Nora was reading a book. The television played softly, but neither of them watched. Caleb suddenly said, "Do you think they miss me?" Nora closed the book and looked at him. "Of course they do," she said. "Parents always do." He nodded and said quietly, "I miss them too. But I don't know how to talk anymore." Nora smiled gently. "Then just listen. Sometimes that's enough." Caleb stood up, took his phone, and walked to the balcony. The city lights were bright below. He looked at the stars above and thought about home. He remembered his their strong voice, his mother's laugh, and the smell of her cooking. He missed the peace of that small house in Silverwood, the place that once felt too small but now felt too far. He finally dialed the number. Evelyn answered after 2 rings. "Caleb," she said happily. Her voice was warm, filled with emotion. Caleb smiled without realizing it. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. "It's been a while." Evelyn said, "I was waiting for your call." Caleb looked down and said, "I'm sorry. Work has been busy." Evelyn laughed lightly. Work is always busy, but a mother's heart is patient. Caleb felt his eyes burn a little. "How's Dad?" he asked. Evelyn said, "He's fine, but he gets tired easily now. He misses you." Caleb leaned against the wall and said, "I'll visit soon, Mom." Evelyn's voice became quiet. "You always say that, Caleb." He closed his eyes and replied, "This time, I mean it." There was silence for a few seconds, and then she said softly, "I'll wait." After the call ended, Caleb stayed on the balcony. The wind touched his face, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something real. Nora came behind him and asked, "You called her?" He nodded. "Yes," he said. "She sounded happy." Nora smiled. "That's what mothers do. They turn small words into happiness." Caleb looked out at the city lights again. "Maybe I've been too far for too long," he said slowly. Nora said, "Then go home before it's too late." Caleb didn't answer. He just stood there, thinking about his parents, his brothers, and the memories he left behind. Deep down, he knew something had to change. Chapter 3. The Lost Dreamer. Landon Reed sat on the floor of his small apartment, surrounded by half-written pages, empty cups, and old books. The air in the room felt heavy. He had not opened his window for days. His desk, once full of ideas, was now empty. He stared at the notebook in front of him and whispered, "Maybe I am not good enough." The room answered with silence. Years ago, Landon had dreamed of becoming a writer. He wanted to make his parents proud, to write stories that could change lives. But life didn't go as planned. Publishers stopped replying to his emails. Money stopped coming in. And slowly, he stopped believing in himself. He picked up a notebook, its cover torn and dusty. On the first page he had written, "Someday the world will read my story." He smiled sadly and turned the pages. They were all blank. He closed it again and looked at his old laptop on the table. The screen was cracked, and the light blinked weakly. He wanted to write, but no words came. He placed his head in his hands and whispered, "Mom still thinks I'm doing fine." The sound of his phone broke the silence. It was a message from his mother. "I hope you're eating well, Landon. Take care of yourself. Call me when you can." He read the message again and again. The warmth in her words made his eyes wet. He remembered her voice from the last call. Soft, full of hope. "You should visit sometime," she had said. He had promised to try, but how could he return home when he had nothing to show? Landon stood near the window. Outside, cars moved, people laughed, and lights glowed in every building. The world looked busy, full of purpose. He felt like he didn't belong to it anymore. He remembered his father's voice, deep and strong, saying, "You don't need to be perfect, son. Just be honest with your heart." That voice still echoed inside him. He walked to the shelf and picked up an old family picture. He was standing between his brother Caleb and his sister Elena. Their smiles were bright, their eyes full of dreams. Landon touched the photo gently and said, "Where did all that happiness go?" He sat on his bed, lost in thought. For years he had been running away from failure, but it had only made him feel lonelier. Maybe his mother didn't care about his success. Maybe she just wanted her son back. He opened his notebook again and began to write. His handwriting was shaky at first, but he didn't stop. "A mother waits even when the world forgets you," he wrote. "And maybe that's what keeps you alive." He paused, reading his own words, and smiled for the first time in weeks. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. His phone buzzed again. This time it was from Caleb. "Mom called me too. She wants us all home. Are you going?" Landon looked at the message for a long moment. He typed slowly, "I don't know yet." But deep inside, he already knew his answer. He turned off the light and lay down, staring at the ceiling. His heart felt lighter. The next morning, Landon woke up early. He made coffee, cleaned his desk, and opened his laptop. He began to type again. Not for money, not for success, but for peace. Each line felt like a small step toward home. He wrote about lost families, broken dreams, and second chances. When he finished, he leaned back and smiled quietly. He took his phone and typed a short message to his mother. "Mom, I'm coming home soon." Within a few minutes, she replied, "That's the best news I've heard in years." Landon's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of hope. He closed his notebook and looked at the morning light through the window. The city still looked busy, but something inside him had changed. He wasn't afraid anymore. He whispered softly, "Maybe going home is not failure. Maybe it's where I was meant to begin again." Chapter 4. The Silent Daughter. Elena Reed sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone. Her mother's message was still there. "Come home soon, dear. We miss you." She had read it at least 10 times. Her thumb moved toward the reply button, but she stopped every time. She did not know what to say. The words felt heavy in her chest. Outside her apartment window, the evening lights of the city shone brightly, but inside, everything felt dim. She had work, money, and comfort, yet something inside her was missing. She whispered to herself, "I have everything, but I don't feel happy." Her apartment was clean and perfect, but silent. The kind of silence that made her heart ache. She looked around at the walls, at the pictures of her smiling face with friends, and at the awards she had won at work. None of it meant anything now. She had been through a heartbreak that no one knew about. A man she once loved had walked away without saying goodbye. After that, she had learned to smile for the world and hide her pain from everyone, even her parents. Every time her mother called, she said, "I'm fine, Mom," with a forced smile that no one could see through the phone. But she wasn't fine. That night, Elena sat by the window, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold. She opened her phone and looked at old photos. Her father fixing a chair in the yard, her mother baking, her brothers laughing together. Those pictures were full of warmth. She whispered, "We were all so close once." A tear rolled down her cheek. She missed those days when she didn't have to hide her feelings, when love was simple, and when life didn't feel like a competition. Her phone rang suddenly. It was her mother calling again. Elena took a deep breath before answering. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. Evelyn's voice was warm. "Elena, it's so nice to hear your voice. How are you?" Elena hesitated and said, "I'm okay, Mom. Just tired." Evelyn laughed lightly. "You always say that, dear. You sound like you need rest and home." Elena smiled through her tears. "Maybe," she said quietly. Evelyn continued. Your father asks about you every morning. He misses you. There was silence for a moment, and then Elena said, Tell him I'll come soon, Mom. Evelyn's voice brightened. You will? That makes me happy. When the call ended, Elena sat still for a long time, looking at the wall. She felt something move inside her. A small feeling she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. She stood up, walked to her wardrobe, and opened it slowly. Her old bag was lying in the corner. She took it out, brushed off the dust, and placed it on the bed. She began to pack a few clothes, her journal, and an old family photo she had kept hidden in a drawer. In the picture, she was standing between her brothers, Caleb and Landon. Her parents were smiling proudly behind them. She touched her mother's face in the picture and whispered, I'm coming, Mom. When she finished packing, she sat on the bed again. Her apartment looked quiet and neat, but it didn't feel like her place anymore. It was only a space where she worked and slept. Her heart belonged somewhere else. She sent a message to her brother Landon. Mom called me too. I think I'll go home for a few days. He replied after a while, Same here. I'm going too. She smiled faintly at the message. The next morning, she woke up early. She made a cup of coffee and looked out the window one last time. The city was still beautiful, but it didn't comfort her anymore. She whispered, Maybe peace is not in this city. Maybe it's where my family is. She picked up her bag, locked the door, and stepped outside. The cool morning air touched her face. She felt nervous but calm at the same time. For the first time in many months, she was doing something her heart wanted. As she walked toward the train station, she thought about how her parents would react when they saw her. She imagined her father smiling softly, and her mother's eyes filling with tears. She smiled too, thinking of them. She didn't know what would happen when they all met again. Maybe they would talk. Maybe they would argue. Maybe they would just sit in silence. But it would be real. It would be family. As the train started moving, Elena looked out the window. The city faded behind her. The roads stretched ahead, quiet and endless. She placed her hand on her chest and whispered, I'm going home. This time, I won't run away again. Chapter 5. The Reunion Plan. Evelyn Reed stood in the living room, holding a duster in one hand and an old photo frame in the other. Dust floated in the air as sunlight entered through the half-open window. She smiled as she wiped the glass. The picture showed her children when they were small, Caleb holding Landon's shoulder, and Elena standing in front of them with a shy smile. Evelyn touched the photo gently and whispered, You're all coming home soon. For the first time in many years, she felt excited. The thought of seeing her children again filled her with hope. Thomas sat on the sofa, watching her with a soft smile. You're cleaning everything again, he said slowly. His voice was weak but warm. Evelyn looked at him and laughed. Yes, I want the house to look good. They haven't seen it in so long. Thomas said, They're coming for you, not for the house. Evelyn stopped for a second and smiled. Still, I want them to feel welcome. She moved from one room to another, folding curtains, cleaning the table, arranging old books. Every small thing reminded her of her children. She found Caleb's old school report card, Landon's notebook full of unfinished stories, and Elena's little drawing of a flower. She placed them all together on the table. "They'll smile when they see these," she said softly. Thomas looked at her and replied, "You never throw anything away, do you?" She shook her head. A mother never throws away memories. In the evening, she made tea and sat beside Thomas. "Do you think they'll really come?" she asked. Thomas nodded. "I do. Sometimes people just need a reason to return." Evelyn looked thoughtful. "I didn't give them a reason before. Maybe that's why they stayed away." Thomas said kindly, "Don't blame yourself. Everyone loses their way for a while." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe now it's time they find their way back." Later that night, Evelyn sat by the window, looking outside. The stars shone softly in the dark sky. She imagined her children on their way, Caleb thinking quietly in his car, Landon packing his notebooks, and Elena sitting near a train window with her head resting on the glass. She could almost hear their voices again. For a moment, she closed her eyes and felt peace. The next morning, she woke up early. She prepared their rooms, spread clean sheets, and arranged fresh flowers on the tables. She even placed small notes near each pillow with words like, "Welcome home" and "We missed you." Thomas watched her from his chair. "You're glowing today," he said. Evelyn smiled. "I'm just happy. I want this house to feel alive again." By afternoon, the rooms were ready. The house smelled of fresh air and warm memories. Evelyn sat down beside Thomas and took his hand. "Soon," she said softly, "they'll walk through that door." Thomas looked at her with gentle eyes. "Yes," he said, "and when they do, everything will feel right again." Evelyn nodded, holding his hand a little tighter. "We've waited long enough," she whispered. That evening, as the sun went down, Evelyn looked at the empty road outside. Somewhere far away, her children were already packing their bags. She smiled to herself and said, "They're coming home." Chapter 6. When they returned, the sun was low in the sky when the first car stopped outside the Reed house. Evelyn looked through the window and pressed her hand to her heart. It was Caleb. He stepped out slowly, holding a small bag in one hand. His eyes looked tired, but when he saw his mother standing at the door, his face softened. "Mom," he said quietly. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "You came," she whispered, pulling him into her arms. Thomas smiled from his chair inside. "Look at you," he said, his voice weak but full of pride. Caleb walked to him and bent down to hug him. "Hi, Dad," he said softly. "I missed you." Thomas patted his back gently. "You took your time," he said with a smile. Caleb laughed for the first time in a long while. A few hours later, another car stopped. This time it was Landon. He walked toward the house slowly, carrying an old backpack. He looked nervous, like a child again. When he saw his father through the window, he hesitated for a moment. But then the door opened, and Evelyn came running to him. "Landon," she said with joy. "You look thinner." He smiled shyly. "Still the same mom," he said, hugging her. Thomas watched from the chair and said, "Come here, son." Landon stepped forward and knelt beside his father. "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner," he whispered. Thomas touched his shoulder and said, "You're here now. That's what matters." In the evening, a train stopped at the small Silverwood station. Elena stepped down with her bag in hand. The cool wind touched her face. She looked around, and everything felt familiar yet distant. When she reached home, the door opened before she could knock. Evelyn stood there with tears in her eyes. "My little girl," she said softly. Elena hugged her tightly, not saying a word. Thomas smiled when he saw her. "You're still the quiet one," he said. Elena laughed lightly and kissed his hand. "I missed you, Dad." For the first time in years, all 5 of them sat at the same table. The house was warm and full of voices again. Evelyn served food with a smile that never faded. "Just like old times," she said softly. But beneath the smiles, everyone felt something deeper. Guilt, distance, and unspoken words. Caleb asked Landon, "So, how's your writing going?" Landon looked down. "I stopped," he said. "Nothing worked out." Caleb wanted to say something but stayed quiet. Elena looked at them and said softly, "We all stopped something." Her words hung in the air. After dinner, Thomas sat in his chair, looking at his children. "It feels like a dream," he said. "All of you here again." Evelyn touched his shoulder and smiled. "It's not a dream. It's family." Caleb looked at his father and said quietly, "I should have visited more." Thomas nodded. "Yes," he said simply. "But you're here now." Landon added, "I thought you'd be angry at me." Thomas smiled. "You're my son. I can't be angry forever." Elena looked at her mother and whispered, "You never gave up, did you?" Evelyn smiled. A mother doesn't stop hoping. Later that night, the lights were off, but no one slept early. Caleb sat near the window, Landon walked in the yard, and Elena lay awake staring at the ceiling. Each one thought about the lost years, the calls they never made, the visits they postponed, the words they left unsaid. Yet tonight, something felt different. They were together, and the house that once felt cold was warm again. Evelyn looked at Thomas, who was already half asleep in his chair. "They're really here," she whispered. He opened his eyes slowly and smiled. "Yes," he said, "and maybe this time they'll stay." Evelyn nodded, her eyes shining in the dim light. She looked toward the hallway where her children's soft voices echoed. For the first time in years, she felt peace. Chapter 7. The Long Night. The night was quiet in the Reed house. Everyone had finished dinner, and the air was full of old memories. For the first time in years, all of them were under the same roof. But beneath their smiles, something heavy still rested in their hearts. Caleb sat near the window, staring into the darkness outside. Landon was in the next room, reading his old stories, and Elena sat near her father, quietly watching him breathe. Evelyn was in the kitchen, washing the last of the dishes, her mind full of thoughts. When she came back to the living room, she noticed that Thomas looked pale. He tried to smile, but his voice was weak. "I'm fine," he said softly. Evelyn touched his hand and whispered, "You don't look fine." Caleb stood up quickly. "Dad, are you okay?" Thomas tried to speak, but the words came slowly. "Just a little tired." Evelyn asked him to rest, but he refused. "Not now," he said. "I want to sit with my children." His voice trembled, but his eyes were full of love. They all gathered near him. Landon came closer and said, "You should rest, Dad." Thomas smiled and said, "I will, son. But first I want to say something." The room fell silent. The only sound was the ticking clock on the wall. "I've made many mistakes," Thomas said slowly. "I was hard on you sometimes. I wanted all of you to be strong. But maybe I forgot to show how proud I was." Evelyn placed her hand on his shoulder, and her eyes filled with tears. Caleb said quietly, "You don't have to say that, Dad. We know." Thomas shook his head. "No, you don't. I should have said it long ago." Landon looked down at his hands. "I failed, Dad," he said softly. "I tried to make you proud, but nothing worked out." Thomas smiled. "You didn't fail, Landon. You just haven't reached your ending yet." Elena wiped her eyes and said, "I hid a lot from you, Dad. I didn't want you to know I was hurting." Thomas looked at her gently. "Pain is a part of love, my dear. You'll understand it better when you forgive yourself." Caleb leaned forward, his eyes red. "I was busy chasing things that don't matter anymore," he said. Thomas nodded. "Then stop chasing, son. Just live." The room was quiet again. Evelyn sat beside Thomas, holding his hand tightly. "You've said enough," she whispered. "Now rest." Thomas looked around at his children and smiled faintly. "This is what I always wanted," he said. "All of you, here together." His head leaned back, and his breathing slowed. For a moment, everyone froze. Then Evelyn whispered his name, but he didn't respond. Caleb rushed to him, holding his shoulder gently. Thomas opened his eyes once more and said in a faint voice, "Don't leave each other again." Then he closed his eyes. The night grew colder. No one spoke. Evelyn leaned on Caleb's shoulder and began to cry quietly. Landon walked to the window, looking up at the stars. Elena knelt beside her father, holding his hand. "We're here, Dad," she whispered. "We're all here." Outside, the wind blew softly, touching the house with peace. Inside, the Reed family sat together in silence, a silence full of love, regret, and understanding. They had come home, not just to see their father, but to find each other again. Chapter 8. The Morning of Change. The morning sun slowly entered through the window, filling the room with a soft golden light. Evelyn sat beside Thomas's bed, holding his hand. His breathing was calm now, his face peaceful. After the long night, she had not slept at all. Her eyes were tired, but her heart felt strangely quiet. She whispered, "You can rest now, Thomas. The children are home." Her voice broke, but she smiled through her tears. Around her, the house was silent again, but it was not the same silence as before. This silence carried love, forgiveness, and the memory of words that would never be forgotten. Caleb stood near the doorway, looking at his father. He had never seen him so still. Landon was sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, his eyes swollen from crying. Elena was beside her mother, holding a blanket close to her chest. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Evelyn whispered softly, "He wanted us together. That was his last wish." Caleb walked closer and said gently, "He got what he wanted, Mom. He brought us home again." Evelyn nodded. They spent the next few hours together. Evelyn made tea for everyone, moving slowly as if each step carried years of memories. Caleb helped her in the kitchen, and when their hands touched while passing a cup, she looked at him with tears in her eyes. "I thought I lost you," she said quietly. Caleb shook his head. "You never did, Mom. I just lost myself for a while." She smiled faintly. "Now you're back." Landon joined them and sat beside his brother. "Do you remember," he said, "how Dad used to wake us early and make us run around the yard?" Caleb laughed softly. "I hated it." Evelyn smiled, listening. "He said it was to make you strong," she said. "And now I understand what he meant." Elena came closer and added, "He just wanted us to be ready for life." For the first time since last night, the house was filled with soft laughter. It was weak and quiet, but it felt real. Later in the afternoon, they went to the garden behind the house. The flowers were blooming. The air smelled fresh after the rain. Evelyn looked at the trees and whispered, "Your father planted these when you were small. He said one day you'll come back and sit under their shade." She looked up at the sky and smiled softly. He was right. Caleb placed his hand on her shoulder and said, "He's still here, Mom. Maybe not in the way we want, but he is." Evelyn nodded and closed her eyes for a moment. That evening, they sat together in the living room, the same place where Thomas had once told them stories. The house looked alive again. Landon took out his old notebook and began to write. Caleb read over his shoulder and smiled. "You're writing again," he said. Landon replied, "I think I have something to say now." Elena looked at them both and said, "Maybe we all do." Evelyn listened quietly, her eyes shining. "That's what your father would have wanted, to see you living again." As night fell, the house lights glowed warmly. Evelyn sat by the window with a blanket over her knees. The children sat nearby, talking softly about their plans, their work, and their memories. For the first time, they didn't speak like strangers. They spoke like a family that had found each other again. When everyone finally went to bed, Evelyn stayed awake a little longer. She looked outside at the stars and whispered, "Thank you, Thomas. You brought them back to me." She felt a soft peace in her heart, as if he could hear her. The next morning, the sky was clear and bright. Caleb walked outside to the garden, followed by Landon and Elena. They stood silently, feeling the cool air and the calm around them. Caleb said, "I think we should visit more often." Landon smiled. "No," he said softly. "Not visit. We should stay connected." Elena nodded. "We will from now on." Evelyn joined them a few minutes later, her face calm, her heart strong. "Your father is proud of you," she said quietly. "And so am I." They stood together, not as broken people anymore, but as a family healed by love and loss. The wind moved gently through the trees. Somewhere, it felt like Thomas's voice was whispering with it, not in words, but in peace. Evelyn took her children's hands and said softly, "This house isn't empty anymore." And for the first time in many years, it was true.